morning, everybody, and welcome to the last episode of 2024 of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name's Armand, and I'm here with my co-host, my co-goon, whatever the heck you call it when you drop the New Year's ball, whatever it is, Nick Sigelski. I don't know what that intro was, but today, folks, every single year we do a look back on all of the best tactics of the year prior. And so last year we did the 30 MPC 2023 awards, and this year we have the 15 best tactics from 2024. Nick, why should people listen?
It's amazing. We continue to learn things from our guests every single year, and we spent the last week or so reflecting on some of the best of what we learned from the world's best sellers, and today we're going to teach you the things that stood out to you and me as it relates to best practices on how to sell. So we have bucketed things into best practices for prospecting, best practices for closing or some discovery and sales process stuff, and then some best leadership practices from the new leadership version of 30 MPC that came out this last year.
And our criteria for selecting the 5 in each category was not the tactics that sounded the best, sounded the sexiest, but one criteria. Do we actually use them when we sell today? So let's start with the prospecting category. Nick, kick it off.
So the first one that I have is from Sarah Uwe, formerly known as Sarah Plowman. You've probably seen her cold call videos on TikTok. She talks about no matter what objection she gets hit with on a cold call, the first words out of her mouth in response to that objection is, well, that's actually exactly why I called. And then she rolls into however she's going to overcome that objection. That's exactly why I called. I figured I wanted to get ahead of things before you started researching in 6 months. Or that's actually exactly why I called. Usually if I waited for people to call me when they were interested, I wouldn't have a job anymore. So what she does is she hits them with, hey, your objection is actually the reason that I called in the first place. And what I like about this is Sarah has a plan for getting hit with an objection. What a lot of salespeople do is they get hit with an objection and they shut down. Well, shoot, there's nothing here. She turns the objection into a reason to keep things going forward and have a meeting in the first place. So number 2 is also a cold calling best practice. And this one came from Josh Braun on one of our most popular episodes of the year, where he talks about presupposing the customer's solution and the complexity on their end that has kept them from buying something already. And so the example that Josh used on our episode was he was talking about if you were selling a commission calculation solution. What you might say to your prospect on the cold call is, hey, my guess is you've already looked into commission calculators in the past, huh? And they would say, yeah, you know what, I have. And then what he'll do is he will offer them a reason why they didn't do anything. And he'll say something like, you know, my guess is nothing was able to handle the complexity of your commission calculations, huh? And now what he's doing is he's actually reducing an immense amount of sales pressure because he's not trying to force his solution on them. He's actually giving them reasons for an out that actually help him uncover a more nuanced way to pitch his solution in response to that.
Number 3, also a cold calling tip that has nothing to do with what you say, but it's something that you do before you even pick up the phone. Ken Amar gave us the tactic to call yourself first before you dial with a new phone number. Yeah. So if you're purchasing phone numbers from a sales engagement platform or a VoIP provider, oftentimes those phone numbers are rotated or recycled. In other words, someone else has already ripped 100 dials a day on it. And oftentimes a carrier like AT&T, Verizon, or someone else will literally mark those numbers as spam. And so the new number that you picked up will already be marked as spam. So call yourself, and if you are marked as spam likely already, rotate the number again.
Number 4 is how to write a cold email that actually resonates with an executive. This one came from Kyle Coleman. And what he talked about in this episode is you really need 3 things in order to write an email that truly resonates with your prospect. The first is a business initiative. Is the company trying to IPO? Did they just absorb a smaller competitor? Are they growing in that respect? Figure out what is a big business initiative related to revenue for them. From there, you want to juxtapose that initiative with industry trends. What's going on in that specific industry or segment that might make that initiative go a little bit rockier? And then from there, the last thing to layer in is you want to look for a trigger or an observation about the prospect that adds to that problem. And so an example of this might be if I was selling law firm billing software, I might look for a law firm that was growing by acquiring other law firms, which is a very common thing with large law firms. That would be a big business initiative. From there, I would need to know what an industry trend related to those law firms is. One of the big ones was law firms had to comply with these very, very complex billing guidelines related to the different practice groups that the law firm had. And so if you acquired a new law firm, that likely meant you would be billing new clients and you would have more billing complexity to deal with. So I would look for, they're growing, they're acquiring law firms. I know the backdrop of when you bill new clients, there's a lot of complexity. And then an observation or a trigger I might find would be, oh, they're hiring for a billing coordinator or they're hiring in the finance department. That would tell me that they're staffing up and investing in that function because there's something going on there. Now I can use those three things as a way to write an email that doesn't need to be super, super short, but will resonate. Hey, I saw this, I know this is happening, and I also saw this. We can help make your problems easier. That's how you write an email that truly resonates.
And so, folks, number 5 is a shameless plug because we released our book, Cold Calling Sucks, and That's Why It Works. And we went through your minimum viable cold calling framework from 30MPC. It starts with one of 2 openers. Today, we'll give you the Heard the Name Tossed Around opener. So if you pick up the phone, your goal is for your prospect to forget that it's a cold call by dropping the fact that you work with someone that looks like them or is in their network. So I might say, hey, Nick, we work with a few other Andreessen portfolio companies. It's Armand from Pave. Have you heard a name tossed around?
And a lot of times you're going to reach people who have never heard your name tossed around, even if you're a well-known company. And you're usually going to hear, well, no, but how can I help you? From there, what you're going to roll into is what we call a problem proposition. Instead of hitting them over the head with your value or your pitch, instead, as a way to get credibility and to get them interested in talking with you, you're going to hit them in the head with the biggest, meatiest problem that you think they have that your product can solve. And so you might say something like, well, shoot, I guess I'm not as popular as I thought. Well, look, Armand, the reason that I called you is most of the CFOs of the insurance defense firms that I talk to tell me they're pretty fed up with all of the deductions, rejections, and appeals that they get on the e-bills that they send to their insurance carrier clients after they win a big case for them. And we usually can help with that by cutting down on bill appeals by alerting your attorneys to billing guideline violations right when they're entering their time. And look, I know I called you totally out of the blue here. I guess, would you be open to learning more when I'm not calling you out of the blue? What I'm doing is I'm leading 90% of my pitch is the problem we solve. 10%, one sentence, is how we make that problem go away.
From there, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get some sort of objection. And that is when the game begins. Most sellers make the mistake of getting an objection and immediately countering it with a pitch. But you need to realize that most objections are actually reactions. They are not real objections to the solution that you're offering. They're objections to the interruption itself. And so in the Mr. Miyagi method to handle any objection, step number 1 of handling the objection is to agree with the objection. So if Nick says, look, man, totally get it, but I've got no budget, I'm going to agree with that objection by saying, honestly, man, I totally get it. It's frankly harder to keep a tool today, let alone get something new. And then from there, I want to incentivize conversation. In other words, I want to get more information about the objection so I can handle it effectively. So I might say, hey, Nick, just so no one calls you again, could you give me a sense, is it because you're just out of budget for this cycle? Or is it literally like anything you try to get any sort of approval for is on a complete standstill and you get put through the ringer? By agreeing with the objection and getting them talking, you're turning what is initially an interruption into an actual conversation, and you're also gathering more information about the objection. So if Nick says, honestly, man, it's a little bit of both, and honestly, getting anything approved here is a complete nightmare. I'm going to continue to agree with that objection, and I'm going to sell the test drive, not the car. In other words, I need to answer the question, why should Nick take the meeting even if he never buys the product? And so I might say this, honestly, Nick, I appreciate you sharing this, and my guess is you're probably literally never going to buy this thing. But every once in a while, when budget does free up, the folks who usually end up getting it are the ones who know what's like 1, 2, and 3 on their list. So would you be open to taking a look at this thing not for now, but just in case budget frees up down the road. And so what we're doing is we're getting them in the car. Everyone wants to test drive the Tesla. And then once they're in the car, we can teach them how to go secure a budget, rip and replace, sell their old car, etc.
Boom. All right. Well, that brings us to our closing best practices.
So in multiple episodes, Mark has walked through his 5-stage sales process. I'm not going to walk through all 5 sales stages right now, but what's really, really important is that most sellers look at their sales stages and they see a stage like demo, and they're like, the next step for me is to do a demo. And the problem is this gets you in the mindset of doing activities instead of thinking about what do you need to get from your prospect to get them one step closer to the purchase. So the purpose of doing a demo is to get solution agreement. The purpose of doing a discovery call is to get to problem agreement. And so anytime you set up a call or you set up a next step with your prospect, don't think about the call that we're setting up or the meeting that we're having. Think about what do you need to get from this prospect in order to get closer to closing the deal? And then think about the best meeting you can use to get that thing.
What you don't want to do here is mistake activity for achievement. Just because somebody said, hey, send me a case study, or I'd love to see a demo, doesn't mean they are actually moving forward as it relates to them wanting to buy from you. One of the things that Mark said on an episode that you actually did, Armand, on that 5-stage sales process is reps that don't have a mindset of when I give something to my prospect, I'm going to ask for something back in return, never perform as well as reps that do have the mindset. And what Mark said is he goes, it's okay for you to have a professional business relationship where you equally give and get. And so what you should be thinking about is anytime you give something to your prospect, even if it's something simple, you need to think about what can I get in return? And so an example of this is if they're like, hey, send over a case study, I'll take a look at it. What you might say is, hey, I'd love to send you over a quick case study. I guess question for you, I'm not 100% sure what would be most applicable. Let me ask you this, and I know it's somewhat of a weird question, but are you planning on making this decision in a month or like 6 months? And the reason that I ask is I want to make sure that I'm sending something that's relevant to your current situation. Now what you're doing in this scenario is you are trading case study in exchange for timeline.
Number 2 in the discovery category is the magic moment question. We originally learned this from Charles Mulbauer a couple of years ago, and we re-referenced it in our June sales playbook on how to run a discovery call or uncover pain with discovery questions. And so the key to it is this. This is my single most used discovery question of all time. The moment a prospect agrees to a problem, all you need to do to turn that problem into a story is literally ask, when did you realize that that was a problem? So if Nick says, look, my employees don't understand their stock options, I'm going to say, I totally get it, man. I see that all the time. Question, my guess is you didn't wake up yesterday and think, man, none of these employees get these stock options. I guess, when was the moment you realized that the employees didn't totally get it? And 9 times out of 10, Nick will barrel into this long-winded story about the one employee who left 50 grand on the table when he only got a 5K salary increase at another company. So use that question to turn a problem into a story every time you get problem agreement.
Do I tell long-winded stories? I didn't realize that. Armand.
Yeah, that's what the editors are for. Go on to the next tactic.
All right, so the next one is from Stephen Brierton, who's an SVP over at ZoomInfo. He taught us the 1 through 10 question that you can ask at the end of any demo or presentation to get real, honest feedback from the prospect about where you stand. So what you do is you finish giving a demo, and at the end, you're going to ask something like, so Armand, usually at this point, you're somewhere on a scale of 1 through 10. 10 would be, man, this is the best thing I've ever seen. How do I get signed up? I want to get started today. 1 would be, wow, this is probably the worst demo I've ever seen. Nick, you should probably go find a different career. I guess from your perspective, where do you feel like you are within that range? Now, instead of you hearing, oh, it looked pretty good, or we liked it, which doesn't really tell you anything, you're going to get real information. Almost no one's going to give you a 10. If they really liked it, they might say an 8 or a 9. And now what you can do is you can say, okay, cool, that's great to hear. I guess what made it a 9? Now you hear all the things that they liked, and you know those are the value points to sell against further down the line. And now you can uncover the gap of, okay, well, I guess a 9's pretty good, but what would have made it a 10? And now you figure out what was missing. And usually it's just something that like they didn't see or they misunderstood, and now you can get yourself to a 10.
And that brings us to tactic number 9, which will bring us to tactic number 10. Tactic number 9 is from the legendary Chris Voss, author of Never Split the Difference. If you've seen his ads on Masterclass, he is the famous FBI negotiator. And when you find that someone is negotiating for the sake of negotiating, you want to use what's called a label. And what you might say is, it seems like you just want a deal? Or it sounds like you're just trying to get a good deal here? You want to avoid aggressively calling out your prospect and saying, dude, you're going to buy this thing. You just want to get a deal? That will actually have a prospect dig their heels in more and negotiate more out of spite because they don't want to look bad. You almost want to come to it like you're confused, but you're still recognizing the fact that it's on them to get a good deal for their organization. So I really recommend listening to that episode so you can hear Chris Voss deliver it because his tone is perfect.
The last one comes from Matt Dixon, who is the author of the phenomenal book, The Jolt Effect. And we actually had a tactic teardown webinar where I learned this one from him. What he talks about is towards the back half of the sales cycle, you need to stop discovering and asking all sorts of questions and start telling or leading. One of the best ways to overcome customer indecision is for you to take the lead and offer recommendations. And that looks like you doing things like taking options off the table and saying, hey, we have this package, but I actually wouldn't do that one. I would go over here. Hey, there's 2 different ways you can think about this implementation. I would recommend going this route because it's going to reduce the complexity for you. What you have to start doing at the end of the sales cycle, really about midway through, is stop asking them to tell you what they need to do, and you start telling them because you are the expert. And that is how you can tip them over the edge of making the ideally right decision for them in their business.
And folks, that brings us to our final category of 5, the leadership tactics of 2024. Nick, what's number 1?
First one is invert your hiring funnel. This is one that I learned from you, Armand. Too many new sales leaders in the beginning of the hiring process, they grill their best candidates because they want to figure out, like, is this person able to sell? What you should be doing instead is in the beginning of your hiring process, you need to, if the candidate is clearly someone who's good, sell them on why they should come work at your company and why it's a great opportunity. Once you've gotten them bought in, then you can do some testing in the back half of the sales process. What too many people do is in the beginning, they test them, and then the candidate ends up opting out or they end up favoring another opportunity, and it's an uphill battle trying to win them back. So sell first, then test.
And that brings us to the end of the process where you sell, evaluate, and then you're going to sell them again. But the way you sell someone at the end of the interview process from Mark Cosaglo is you try to sell them out of taking the job. Way too many astute candidates know that they're being given a rosy image of what the company is like, what the attainment is like, and then you step in and a smart candidate knows, okay, this is what reality looks like. And so what you can do is you can beat people to the punch. I literally used this tactic the other day because we just hired our first marketer at 30MPC. We built a full doc where we say, this is why we think you're the best fit in the world for 30MPC. Here's what everyone on the team said about you. But first, before we get into the offer, here's every reason you should not join 30 Minutes to President's Club. I pulled up our P&L and I showed them every ugly part of our financials. I talked about the risks of having Nick and I be the only 2 creators in this business, the risk of, frankly, us never having grown a marketing organization before, but there's also a lot of opportunity in that. And what that did is it actually opened the door for her to say, you know what, I was thinking about some of these things. These were actually unspoken objections on my mind. And we had a 15-minute conversation that made her feel more fired up after than she was before because you threw in disarming transparency all of the potential objections out into the wild. And then the next thing is once you actually hire those folks, tactic number 3 is your 20-80 training rhythms. So every single week at PAVE, we had what we called the core 4 training rhythms. The Monday morning meeting where we would call out prospecting activity commits. The Tuesday top 10 deal review where we would tear down the top 10 deals in the organization in front of everyone on the sales floor. Wednesday and Thursday pipeline reviews, where we would do that in a one-on-one environment, and then Friday tape reviews, where we would get good at discovery. The key here is in the first week of the month, you want to spend 20% of your time training your team. So you might pick one concept on the first Friday of the month to replace your tape review and train your team on negotiation. But then you want to reinforce that concept 80% of the time. And so if you train your team on negotiation, you might run 3 tape reviews in the next 3 weeks on only negotiation tapes with CFOs. And that's how you actually get things to stick. Most sales teams make the mistake of spending 80% of their time training and stuffing more information in their sellers' heads, when in reality, they should spend 20% of their time teaching their team one new thing and then reinforcing it over and over and over again over the next 3 weeks. And over the next year, that is how that stuff will stick.
The next one comes from John Scherer, who is a longtime VP of sales over at Lattice. And what he talked about is the pipeline squeeze. What you're going to do is you sit down with your rep and you're going to go through their pipeline and you ask for every deal in the pipe the exact same 5 questions, which are, what is the deal size? What is the deal close date? 3, is the buyer aware of that close date? 4, what incentive have we given them to hit that close date? And 5, what is the next step? For each question, you're driving the screen share here, you are going to write out the answers that you get and whether they are good or not so good to assess the health of their pipeline. Then what you're going to do is you literally have all of their deals and the most important information related to socialize this with your team. And you're going to send that upwards, downwards, across so that the whole org has visibility into how the sales team is performing. This is a really efficient way to run through the pipeline and also to surface what's going well and what's not going well with each rep's deals.
And then the last one, if you don't see me on YouTube, it is document the wiggle, and we are wiggling around town because it was a great year of tactics. The wiggle is not what Nick does when he wakes up in the morning to wake himself up. It is what good looks like. WGLL. A lot of times people think, I need a full enablement team to build all of my sales decks. You do not. You need a Google Doc. And you need a Google Doc with 8 bullets that explain the 8 things you need to do in a pipeline review, or the 9 questions you need to ask in a discovery call. You document what good looks like, and then you practice the living daylights out of those plays. So let's pretend that your team is struggling with the upfront part of a discovery call when you need to set an agenda. Instead of role-playing the entire discovery call or watching entire discovery tapes, get in a practice room with your team for 1 hour, and for 1 hour straight, get in a practice room with your team, and for 30 minutes straight, do nothing but 30 reps on the agenda only, using the what good looks like framework. That allows you to literally replicate the practice you would get on 30 days of sales calls in 30 minutes. Stop practicing with your team in the game. Alrighty, folks, those were your top 15 tactics of 2024. And folks, not every time we step on the mic is it absolutely perfect. But what we will say is every single year, Nick and I are super, super grateful to have every single one of you listening to this show, downloading the episodes, sharing it with your friends. And every single year we have grown in audience members, and that is because of you all. And frankly, it is an amazing blessing to be able to call this weird thing a job where we talk to an amazing leader and a seller every single week. So whether or not you had the exact end of year, exact end of quarter that you wanted to, folks, the fact that you are listening this far at the end of the year shows that you are the type of rep who will make it to President's Club, whether that's today or in 2025.
Beautifully said, Armand. And folks, if you want to help us out, which is where you usually ask me this question, Armand, if you liked some of the tips, tactics, best practices that we shared in this episode, we have links to each of the full episodes where the guests talked about those things in depth. So go give those a listen. Thank you for listening to 30 MPC, and we'll see you next year, and we'll see you on the next episode.